It's funny. I first met Bill. Actually, Mark Andreessen organized a lunch. He really wanted me to have somebody to help me learn how to be CEO. And he set up a lunch with Bill and I, and we went to lunch and just talked and talked and talked. And it was interesting because going into that, Bill really didn't want to work with me. He was like, absolutely not, I'm not working with anybody else. We talked for a long time afterwards. He called me, he said, I'll come by, I'll help you a couple times a month, I'll come by the office. And so that was really the meeting. So the biggest thing, the big memory that I've got of those times is, when you're CEO, you kind of have, you have a lot of things. You got a lot of guys working for you. You've got a lot of responsibility. But one thing that you have almost none of is friends. And there are you have a lot of fake friends. You got a lot of people who act like they're your friend, but when you're eating dirt, you realize you don't have many friends, and there's very few people you can talk to. Because there's always an implication when you talk. If you talk to your board, there's an implication. If you talk to your employees, there's an implication. If you talk to your executives. So you have to really think about what you're going to say. And the thing about Bill then was he was really, sometimes I felt like he was my only friend. We could, not only could we talk about anything, but, he understood my job. And so it was a very valuable conversation for me. We would go through very hard things. And, sometimes he'd be right and sometimes I'd be right. And we would argue about it and the decision would go one way or the other and whatnot. But no matter what kind of conversation we had, it never changed the relationship. Not at all, not even a little bit. And it's, it sounds funny, oh, well, he's a friend, how valuable is that? But when you're a CEO, there's nothing more valuable and there's no better friend that you could have than Bill. Yeah, so probably the piece of advice that I remember the most was, Bill and we had just sold LoudCloud, which was our services component of the business, to EDS. And this was a deal that basically nobody ever expected us to pull off. It was a spectacular deal, and it saved the company. So we had, and EDS wanted to do this gigantic announcement in New York, and it was going to be a big celebration and so forth. But as part of the deal, we were restructuring the company. So we sold, I think, 140 employees to EDS, and then we had to lay off another 100. So it was a very good news, bad news scenario. And I'm telling Bill about this whole thing, and he looks at me and he just says, well, it's too bad you can't go to New York. And I was like, oh. I was like, and at that point, in my brain couldn't even process what he was saying. I'm like, Bill, what are you talking about? And he said, well, you can't go and announce it because within 30 seconds of that announcement, you've got to tell everybody in your company where they stand, or they'll never trust you again. You can't have them walking away around for a day, not knowing if they have a job, if they're going to EDS, what's happening. And, once he said it, I was like, okay, yep, that's obvious. So I sent Andreessen to New York, and, I talked to the employees. But, that was the thing about Bill that he did better than anybody else who I've ever known, is he could see whatever decision you were making through everybody else's eyes. So he would look at it you look at it through well, this is my perspective and the company needs publicity and this and that. Well, what about the perspective of any engineer in the company, any admin, anybody in there, how are they going to see it and how are they going to think about it? And Bill would see that instantaneously. He wouldn't even have to work at it. It would just come to him. And to have a guy who could see the company that way, and it's probably the biggest skill I ever learned was to, pause and go, okay, how is this going to play everywhere? And how would it make me feel if I was that person? And I'll never be as good as Bill at it, just because he's like the Einstein of that. But it was so valuable for me to learn that from him. Yeah, so I think the big thing that Bill's brought to Silicon, Silicon Valley is a little bit what he's brought to me, which is, look, nobody's perfect, and I don't want to make Bill into like something he's not. Like, well, what would Bill Campbell do? Or he's Jesus, because that's not fair to him, and probably not fair to Jesus. But Bill really kind of understood what it meant to run a company in the right way. And so, like, what does that mean? And trying to do something larger than yourself, and trying to get a team together and do something important. And how you do that matters. And the kinds of companies that get built are different if you do it in the right way than in the wrong way. And the impact, and Silicon Valley has become so important that technology is kind of the most important industry in the world now. And is the impact of that going to be on the world like good or bad? Is it going to be kind of a violent, difficult impact, or is it going to be an impact from a set of companies that really want to do things the right way and really care about people? And I think what Bill brought to Silicon Valley is like the companies he's touched, and then all of their derivatives, which is like a huge percentage of the company in Silicon Valley. When you think about the company, Apple, Google, Amazon, the guys he's worked with, it means that Silicon Valley's impact on the world and society is just much better than it would have been otherwise, because for the most part, or for a lot of part, we do things the right way, and I just don't know that it would have happened that way without him. Well, it's funny because now, like, there's then and now. Like, so now, hey, he's like worked with Larry Page, Jeff Bezos, and Steve Jobs. Like, who else would you want to work with? You'd have to be some kind of idiot not to work with Bill. But that I think, if you go back in time and say, well, why did Steve Jobs want to work with him, which was one of the earlier guys who knew him really well from kind of his first run at Apple. I think it comes down to, Steve needed to see the company the way Bill saw it. Like, he needed somebody there who could work, if he was making a decision, could look at it and go, okay, like, well, this is what that decision means for not just you, but like, this is what it means for the product manager, this is what it means for the engineer, this is what it means for the sales guy, this is what it means for the admin. And to have that understanding of like the people who are working for you and putting in the effort and giving up their lives for like your vision is invaluable. And so once, he did it with Steve at Apple, and I'm like, and once that happened, and every time, he goes in, it's high impact. And, every board, like you go with Bill, it doesn't matter, you could be on like the board of Columbia or the board of Apple, or you could be, coaching Powder Puff Girls. And Bill is always everybody's favorite person. Like, I've never been in a scenario with Bill where like Bill wasn't the favorite. Like, it's just never ever happens. And it's because Bill, like everybody he meets, he understands, he remembers everything about them, and he just really, it feels like he cares because he cares, and it's it's a very special thing. He's a very special person. I can say, like, when we used to, we used to have board meetings, and Bill was on my board. It was always just amazing how like much more excited people would get to see Bill than anything else about that board meeting. And we use that. Like, I was able to use that when I saw that. I was like, wow, that's amazing. And one of the things that Bill and I did, which was super helpful to the company, is we got in trouble on the product at one point, where we were, I would say, significantly behind the competition, and we had to go, okay, like we're gonna have to double down, and we're gonna have to, like, everybody's gonna have to work longer and be more focused and so forth. And the kind of way we kind of orchestrated that whole thing is Bill came in every Friday, Bill and Mike Homer, and we would do kind of show and tell with the engineers, and they were just so excited to see him that it elevated everybody's game, tremendously. So he's just a very special guy. There are, I think, few people in the world that are like that, where everybody is just always excited to see him for any reason. Like, it doesn't matter who you are. You'd be a CEO or an engineer or a 12-year-old girl playing powder puff football. Bill, thank you for everything you've done for me. I would not be who I am I wouldn't be half the person I am without you and your guidance, your help, and your friendship. I love you so much. Congratulations on this. Bless you.